So this is my fifth budget. Actually, there are more budgets if you count the multiple budgets that we had in 2020. But as a wrap-up speech, this is my fifth one. And I can tell you it's very challenging. Every year is the night before, the 2 nights before, barely any sleep because you're trying to distill the last 1.5, 2 weeks worth of discussions and discourse and all the work done into a too long didn't read version. And I can tell you it's really difficult. People often say that, hey, why government communications cannot make it? Why is it so complicated? Why can't you keep it simple? I can tell you that I think government is trying, but the reality is this. When you're in the business of making things work, when you're in the business of actually having to do the real work and the heavy lifting, the details do matter. It is not quite so straightforward. You can't just virtue signal, you can't just bandy about ideas. It's very different when you have to carry them out. I remember a few years ago when Chee Meng was MOE minister, and I as a parent, as all of us as parents, we have a lot of issues about MOE. Hey, why your MOE policy like that? And I remember Chee Meng replying to me, why don't we switch job? You come and change the policy lah. And suddenly everything took on a very different hue. And I think we all know that. It is easy to critique. And I think it's important for us to critique. It's easy to toss out ideas. But when we actually have to bear the responsibility of translating those ideas and views and opinions into reality, it looks very, very different. So in the same way, I would say that it is very difficult to distill everything down into a meme or TikTok clip, and I think I won't be able to do that. The trade-offs are needed. Things take time, and as we all know, are we able to satisfy every need and want? We can't. And many of you here who work, you have your own organizations, whether you're a leader of your political party or your company, in school, we know that we're not always able to do that, but we endeavor to do our best. So it is not easy. The budget and COS process is very involved. It can be quite colorful. This year we had blue and yellow featuring, red and white, and of course green. I don't know whether Minister Grace is wearing green today, but she has been wearing green almost every day. And it can get quite technical as well. But not to worry, I'm not going to repeat all that. I'm not going to babs you until you compass or track you with Joy or Heidi. It sounds kind of creepy that way. But what I will do, I guess, is to take a step back, right? We have been going to all the details, the technical, and all the different things that are required in the budget to make things happen. But I'd like to take a few steps back and perhaps survey the woods and not just look at the trees, the weeds, the bushes, important as they may be to the whole ecosystem, and to consider the world that we're living in. And really 3 main themes. The world we live in, the worries and uncertainties that we're grappling with now, the world that we live in, the post-truth world that we live in, and the world that we live in terms of the bigger stories, right? Noting that a lot of us zoom into all the individual stories that we share. And I think it's important sometimes to be able to also zoom out and look at the bigger picture and the bigger story. So firstly, the world we live in, the worries and uncertainties, and we certainly live in worrying and uncertain times. We are still in the grips of COVID. I think although increasingly we are learning to live with it, even as we're dealing with the economic ramifications of this pandemic that has stricken every nation on earth and affected everyone, we are now caught in the grips of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, it might seem very remote, but I can tell you we all are feeling the effect immediately, with petrol prices going up, and especially we worry about inflation, and inflation was a worry even before this conflict. And if the West were to suspend purchase of Russian oil and gas, what would that impact be on energy prices and on cost of living, which is a recurrent theme that many of you have raised. We have been jittery for some time because we are living in a fast-changing world. We are living amidst a fourth industrial revolution. We are concerned about how things change as our children go to school, at universities. By the time they graduate, is the world going to move on? Is it going to be relevant? We're concerned about the geopolitical implications of the clash or not between US and China and how we're caught up in between that. We are worried about demographic trends in Singapore. We know that. By 2030, 1 in 4 of us will be 65 and above. What does that mean? Will we lose our verve as an economy? Is that going to affect our jobs? And then with that longevity, lower birth rates, the burden on healthcare costs. And we worry also about the climate. And how is it going to change? How is it going to affect us, and especially our children's generation? But if there is any consolation, it is affecting everyone on earth. We are not spared. We are not the only ones. And everyone is grappling with these issues. So the key thing really is how are we able to address the concerns, both for the present and to stage ourselves for the future. And if we have the means and the ability to do that. The world we live in is also, and many of you will be familiar with this term, a post-truth world, whatever that definition might be. And we might have different perceptions of it. But essentially, these days, truth might seem indeterminate, malleable. After all, who determines the truth? Does Parliament determine the truth? Do you determine the truth? Does the government determine the truth? Do facts and evidence matter? Or is truth determined by, well, this is what I believe, or what I feel, or what I hear, and therefore it becomes a truth? Is it based on whoever says it loudest, whoever says it more passionately, eloquently, or more coolly? But that's the world we live in. Right? Many of us zoom in and we share stories about how individuals are affected. Stories are incredibly powerful. We use stories to illustrate gaps and concerns so that we can have better policies to help. Some use stories to inspire, but some use stories to indict, to remonstrate. So stories are powerful, but we all know that stories can be false. Stories can be half true. Stories can also be used out of context. And the question for us as leaders and parliamentarians is that what do we do with these stories? On the ground, we know how these examples could manifest itself. For example, in my area in Chai Chee, we have rental flats. You can go to a rental flat, and some of you who are involved in the work will realize you come to a flat, it's messy, it's a lot of stuff that's there, and the smell of stale sweat, urine, and you feel, how on earth can Singaporeans live in such abject poverty in first world Singapore? How have we failed them? How society failed them? How government has failed them? But if you step next door, in the same one-room rental flat, the neighbor, it's clean, tidy. In fact, some of my residents take great pride in explaining to me how they go to Daiso and they actually decorate their house quite nicely with whatever they buy from Daiso. And you walk away with quite different impressions. Wow, you're impressed by the resilience, you're impressed by the ingenuity. So we talk about the metaverse, but this almost is like a multiverse that we live in. Same, similar facts, stories, but then we walk away with very different impressions. It depends on the context. And for those of us involved in the work, you will know that sometimes it's because of mental health issues, because of hoarding, sometimes because of mobility issues. The individuals are not able to upkeep the flats. Whose responsibility would it be? Individuals? Do we then not ask, where's the family in the overall scheme of things? Where's the neighbors, the community? And of course, government has a role to play. But these are how stories can manifest itself in many, many different ways. And we're living in a world where we have more information than ever before. In fact, information is increasing in exponential rates. But we are not necessarily better informed. We are, like I said earlier, the too long didn't read generation. If it takes a few more swipes left or right or up and down, it just takes too much time. It's just too tedious. Right? We have so much information, we don't know how to process it. We have so many things that distract us. Netflix, Minecraft, K-drama, and some of you will be playing Wordle or Quordle, even worse. And the list goes on, right? Many of us are better educated, more critically minded. But if we ask ourselves honestly, how many of us actually read? Or do we just scan? And because we're kind of smart and we have opinions and views about things, do we formulate those opinions very quickly? Or because we're just too busy with all the different things distracting us, we go to certain commentators for their distillation of of the issues of the day rather than just reading it ourselves. We have live broadcasts of Parliament today, but how many of us actually go to the source and actually listen to what was said? Or we listen to what is being said by others? Do we fact check? But that's the world we live in. I mean, you can lament all you want, you can describe it, but that's the reality. Minister Iswaran shared from Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. I'm less cultured than he is, so I can only share from a book that I find quite telling, Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Or some may criticize Rosling for being overly positive, right? My main takeaway really is that I think as human beings, our nature, are we sometimes not really very evidence-based? We are very much driven by emotions. That's why stories are so powerful. We have this instinct to be negative. Oh, the world is a lot worse than it is today, but is it really? We tend to blame, we like to generalize, etc., etc. It distorts the way we look at things. So when we look at the combination of these different things in the world that we are living in today, it has real implications. We see around the world today, for example, the division and the polarization of American society. And I believe that even the storming of Capitol Hill is arguably a physical and violent manifestation of that. Brexit also happened on the back of a number of fraudulent claims by political leaders. It's a monumental decision, and we wish them well. But there are real-life implications to how all these things play itself out. So the important question, I guess, for all of us as leaders in this parliament, in this environment, is that to realize that this playbook, sadly, actually works, which is why you see many politicians using it. The rise of the far right or even the far left are examples of that. Playing the anti-foreigner card, we see that happening the world over. Race and religion, it's an easy game to play because it's so primordial in every society. Do we play fast and loose with the stories we use? Do we just lift facts from chat groups or wherever it might be? Do we use anecdotes recounted to us without actually checking whether it's true? Do we verify? Or is it a case just simply because I believe it's true and therefore it is? When also in this world where we are all politically correct, are we just too shy, too scared to take a stand, lest we be accused of being close-minded, being cancelled out on social media? So it is happening. And this is a reality of the world. It's not going to go away. I think it's just going to get worse, if you will. But the important question, I guess, both for us as leaders and members of parliament, and I guess Singaporeans at large, is what do we do with that? And especially for us in chambers, how do we then carry out our roles? Do we exploit these gaps and these trends? Or do we rise above it and perhaps take a different course? We lead only because there is trust and respect. When that erodes, there is no basis to lead. And often the negativity and misinformation serve to do one thing, and that's just to erode trust. And what happens then? Do we end up no different from any internet forum? But that's something that all of us need to decide. And we need to ask ourselves, is it creeping into our own political discourse as well? The last point I would like to end on really is the biggest story, which is the world we live in. Is we zoom into all these individual stories, and like I said, they are important. But I think as leaders, we must also have the ability to zoom out and sometimes remind ourselves of the larger trends. So, like leader, I would like to take the opportunity, we are here debating all these issues, but we sometimes forget all the different things that are happening around us. I would like to thank the many who are involved, our clerks, our ushers, our translators, our cleaners every day who keep our space clean and hygienic, our security colleagues, our tea ladies who help us with our beverages, deputy leader, deputy speakers, our journalists out there who are actively reporting to try to keep everyone informed. Hopefully they actually read the stuff that's been put out. And a very big thank you to every single one of you who has made this possible. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our public officers who continue to serve to the best of their ability despite the challenging times. Many of them, apart from creating policies, are also at the front lines because they need to double up because there are other responsibilities. Dr. Tanya Swam, Dr. Wan Rizal, Dr. Janil has talked about being understanding to our healthcare workers. I think it's worth reminding us to bear in mind, to treat all our public servants with decency and respect. They're doing their best. No one is perfect. Right? There will be those who fall afoul of what we expect of them. But for the vast majority of them, they're doing their best to look after all of us. It behooves us to at least accord them that basic dignity and respect. I remember during the debate on public housing a few days ago, I was quite struck by it. We were discussing about the waiting times for HDB flats, eligibility ages, about housing in prime locations, about EIP concerns. And of course, there are areas to improve. There are concerns that we need to assuage. But I'm also reminded by many of my residents who come to me to tell me that, oh, I'm going off, some of them getting married, they're forming new families, they email me, they message me. And as we are talking about the different things to improve, many of our foreign visitors, for example, as you talk to them, are remarkably impressed by public housing policy. 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing, 80%. 73% of them, like many of my residents, they are not high-income Singaporeans, middle, lower middle. 73% of them service their loans with CPF, no cash outlay. And for my low-income families, I have a number of rental blocks. We have, in total, all the low-income families, about 4,500 families in the last 5 years who have gained home ownership, and another 2,200 in the pipeline who have booked their new flats. At a wake 2 nights ago, a senior executive shared that it would seem, initially sort of griping that, as usual, with sandwich class, we're not getting anything. and only the lower income gets. But he works in the aviation industry, and he was quite candid that actually without the government grants and assistance, he might have lost his job. Many more of his colleagues might have lost their jobs. And in many indirect ways, he has benefited too. And I'm glad that he acknowledged that. Many of my residents share the same, whether they're running big businesses, small businesses, many of them having jobs in management positions. They're glad that the policies that all of you have created has helped. And I think the employment figures speak for itself. Our employment rate, age 15 and above, is 67.2% in June 2021, and it is the highest on record. Right, in January, our unemployment rate was 3.1%. It's close to back where it was pre-COVID times. Real income has moved, and especially at the lower income level. And with all the different steps taken, with progressive wage, with workfare, it will continue to go up. And you have seen the projection in terms of where those wages will go. From a healthcare perspective, I think, a lot of us will have views about how the COVID situation should be run. But I guess the question we should ask ourselves is, if we were in the position of the MTF, what would we do? When we have to balance life and livelihood, would it be quite so simple? The truth is, as you take a step back, is that we have a strong trust amongst our people, a strong trust between our people and our healthcare authorities, which allowed us to be able to carry out our SMM measures, which allowed us to be able to vaccinate it, which has enabled us to keep deaths low and serious illnesses at bay, by and large, and enable us to move on to the next stage to deal with the concerns that we have. Schools remain open. Students continue to be educated. On the social front, despite all the challenges, we look at the contributions. Many groups have stepped up to help. President's Challenge, for example, in 2019, they raised $13.2 million. In 2020, it went up to $16.1 million. Slight dip in 2021, but $15 million still. ComChess, normally $56 million a year. FY20, $87 million. Giving.sg, $95.6 million in 2021. 93.4 million in 2020, 95.6 million in 2021. And the list goes on. Minister Lawrence Wong was asked, amidst all the concerns with costs and inflations and so on, what would we do? And I think I'll just end off on this point. Is that we are in good health. The policies that we have taken, it's not easy. The easiest path to take for any government of the day is to spend and keep your electorate happy. In my view, it is completely politically naive and stupid to talk about balanced budget, to talk about tax increases when you have reserves. I don't know what the reserves comprise. Temasek and MAS we know, and GIC, I'm not even going to ask Lawrence what the amount is, right? But we keep it confidential for strategic reasons, but we do have a fair bit of reserves. And we've seen how that came into play in the last few years. And should the situation arise in the coming years, I have no doubt that MOF would step in and do what needs to be done. But we are only able to do that because we are healthy. We have our powder kept dry. And that is the only powder that we have. We have nothing else. Which is why a budget like this is important. As we deal with the present, as we need to also deal with the future, as we deal with the individual needs, we also need to step back and look at the bigger picture. It's important that we do that. Be disciplined, do what we can. But all this can only be done when you have the support of the people. And in Parliament, as we debate this, it's important that we communicate as effectively as we can in the hearts and minds. You're not going to be able to convince everyone. Not everyone will feel that they benefit equally. But on balance, are we able to uplift lives? Are we able to make things better for Singaporeans? Are we able to make things better for Singapore, for today and for tomorrow? And I believe that we have laid the foundations for this. And I'm grateful to all who have contributed to that on both sides of the House to debate the issues. And it now leaves for us, as we have passed all the necessary bills and so on, to execute it and to make it happen, to improve on it and to build on it so that we come back again next year and repeat the process ad nauseum so that we can make the difference. And I think of all countries in the world, as we are all struggling with all the challenges that we face, I think we can be confident that we have the wherewithal to look after our people and to look after our people well today and for tomorrow. Thank you very much.